Hey everybody, Sean here from Somm Wine Club, and I have got some wine for you. This is the 2021 Elvio Cogno Montegrilli Langhe Nebbiolo from Piedmont in northern Italy. Elvio Cogno is a famed producer in Barolo, and I want to talk about the winery, but I think first we have to talk about the person. So Elvio Cogno was born in 1936 in Novello, which is where Elvio Cogno is based, but it hasn't always been based there. When Elvio Cogno was a young man, he was working in a restaurant in Lamora, and his family had been growing grapes and making wine for generations in the region, and no one had really taken the step from making wine for personal consumption and for serving in the restaurant to actually turning it into a business. But Elvio Cogno had this idea that he wanted to produce his own wine. So he started kind of working and making some wine, and by the end of the 50s or so, he had established a reputation for himself for making these prestigious wines, these great wines that deserved people's attention. So that attracted some interest. He was able to partner with another established Barolo producer, Marcarini, who was based in Lamora, and in 1961 they produced their first Cogno wine, Cogno Marcarini 1961 Barolo Brunate. Brunate is another famous cru of Barolo, and at the time not everyone was labeling the vineyards on the labels. That was a relatively forward-thinking way of identifying the wine. People would often just prefer to label it as Barolo to capitalize on the popularity of the name. So through the 60s, Marcarini Cogno continued to produce wines, and by about the 1980s, Elvio Cogno was deciding that it was time for him to strike out on his own and establish a winery that he could just have sole control over and continue to produce the great wines that he wanted to produce. So he went back to his hometown of Novello, and in 1990 purchased a property called Cascina Nuova, which is inside the cru of Rivera in the town of Novello. And so now it's the early 90s. Elvio Cogno is getting a little bit older, but he's still dedicated to producing this great wine from Rivera and from Novello. So at the age of 60, he's planting new vineyards, he's getting things ready and working with his daughter Nadia and her husband Walter Visore, and reestablishing the vineyards of Cascina Nuova and Rivera. Rivera is now considered one of the greatest Barolo cru, and a good part of that, if not all of that, is due to the work of Elvio Cogno and Walter Visore in reestablishing Rivera as an iconic place. Most of Rivera faces southwest, where a lot of the other premium MGA or cru of Barolo face due south to capitalize on a lot of pure sunshine. The problem, and maybe not problem so much, but distinction there, is that Rivera historically has been known for being very austere, very intense, very tannic. There is a lot of iron in the soil, and it's this clay, sandy soil, and so the wines are very high in acidity and very high in tannin, and they can be almost undrinkable when they're young. This is Rivera, the kind of wine that you would lay down for 30, 40, 50 years when it was kind of historically produced. This is not a wine to be drinking young. Now, as climate change has happened, patterns have shifted, weather is different in Barolo than it used to be. A lot of these due south-facing vineyards are getting too warm, and they're not producing the elegant, refreshing, vibrant style of Barolo that they maybe did in the past. But now Rivera has kind of jumped into the spotlight with a little bit of a cooler southwest facing versus southeast facing and south facing site that allows the wines to develop a certain level of elegance and refinement and really pretty aromatic character. That's definitely been to the benefit of Rivera and to Elvio Cogno, and Now we have Rivera kind of at very near the top of some of the most important crew of Barolo, and probably will continue to be for many, many years. Elvio Cogno passed the winery to his daughter and her husband in 1996, and unfortunately passed away in 2016, but is an incredibly important figure in kind of the history and development of Barolo through the 60s through 90s, kind of the golden age of the establishment of Barolo. So this is not Barolo, but it is coming from Rivera. This is Montegrilli Langhe Nebbiolo, which is coming from a 1.4 hectare parcel in the middle of the slope on the south facing portion of Rivera, the portion that gets a little bit more sunshine, a little bit riper, and that makes this wine a little bit easier to drink when it is younger, which is what we want from a Langhe Nebbiolo. So this is done all in stainless steel. It's 100% Nebbiolo, so you're getting that really pretty, like lifted red flowers. It's got this dried red cherry note to it. They call Barolo and Nebbiolo the wine of tar and roses because it smells of like warm pavement, warm soil, rose petals, dried flowers. There is this lovely kind of slightly leafy character to this wine, not in like an underripe or green way, but just like it has this kind of savory herbs, like you've made a bundle of herbs to go into a stock or a stew. Let's taste. The structure of Nebbiolo, I think, is the most incredible and interesting thing about it. You smell this wine, you look at this wine, it's fairly pale in color. It's got this like not quite totally translucent ruby color with just hints of garnet or orange to the rim. And this is a young wine. This is 2021. So we're not looking at this from age. This is just a characteristic of the variety. Some people will look at that and they'll smell it and they'll be like, oh, this is a light wine. This is not a light wine. This is a structured, robust, intense wine. It just happens to be light in color and elegant in its aromatics. This wine is 2021, so it's 3 years old now, but there's still very firm tannins. They're not aggressive. They're not like totally mouth coating and drying your palate out, but they are noticeable. They kind of linger on the front of your tongue and give you that little bit of a furriness, which Nebbiolo is known for. And then the acidity kind of cleanses your palate. You get this warmth from the richness of the fruit and the ripeness of the vintage. And just such kind of delicious, tangy, tart finish to this wine. I talked about Nebbiolo being a great wine for fall, and that's because a lot of the flavors and the characteristics of the wine work so well with things that you want to eat kind of as the weather gets a little cooler. You think things like squash and mushrooms and roasted nuts, doing pasta with a slow cooked, like really rich sauce made with short rib and mushrooms. You get this like kind of warming spices coming through. You can do things like harvest morels and get your mushroom dishes. You've got all kinds of options for game meats, like or fowl, doing duck or pheasant or anything like that, where there's enough fat and flavor that you want something that is going to match the intensity of the flavor of the meat, but not overwhelm it. It's not a wine that you want to serve big Bordeaux with, but you still want something with structure and acidity and tannin, and that's Nebbiolo. Just a delicious wine, a fantastic producer, a great story, and a wine that I'm really happy to be able to share with everybody this month. So enjoy the Elvio Cogno Montegrilli Langhe Nebbiolo, and we'll see you guys all next time.